Hey, I'm Jesse. Let's have a devotion. We're going to pick up overlapping a little bit with what we saw yesterday. We saw in Daniel chapter 10 how fasting and prayer is an act of spiritual warfare. And that God was sovereign, all right? That God brought victory, that God loved Daniel, even in that 3 weeks of anguish and silence from God. Really, it was to be attributed to spiritual warfare. Now we're going to pick up in chapter 11 with the prophecy that comes to Daniel while Darius is king. Right? Look at Daniel chapter 11. In the first year of King Darius the Mede, I stood up to strengthen and protect him. Now I will tell you the truth. All right. So this is bleeding over from what was told to him by this angelic messenger from something called the Book of Truth. I mean, they're just conveying what God wants this prophet to hear. So we saw this yesterday. 3 more kings will arise in Persia, and the 4th will be far richer than the others. So after King Cyrus, you had Cambyses, Pseudo-Smerdis, you had Darius the First, Hystaspes, and then the 4th is Xerxes the First, Ahasuerus. There would also be his son Artaxerxes and some others, but they wouldn't be as prominent. All right, and we saw this yesterday. By the power he gains through his riches, he will stir up everyone against the kingdom of Greece. Okay, at this point, there's a man named Philip of Macedon, and his son is growing in prominence and influence. A warrior king will arise, and he will rule a vast realm and do whatever he wants. I believe this is a prophecy about Alexander the Great. All right, he's the warrior king from Greece. See, Xerxes had tried, in his military campaign against Greece and had largely failed. But by was it 330 BC, the Greeks would conquer the Medo-Persian Empire, and this is exactly what this prophecy tells. It's so exquisite that critics of the Bible have claimed this was written 200 years after it was actually written, because its record historically is just so incredible. So this warrior king, in verse 3, I believe this is Alexander the Great, but as soon as he is established, his kingdom will be broken up and divided to the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his descendants. Right? So it's instead, it's distributed among his generals. This would give rise to the Ptolemaic Empire, for example. Right? These are the generals of Alexander the Great, and they would assume his jurisdictions. It will not be the same kingdom that he ruled, because his kingdom will be uprooted and will go to others besides them. And so it's that whole area is going to pass hands all the way up to Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth, right? From the Seleucids to the Ptolemies, especially Jerusalem. It's always going to seem to be kind of right in the middle of this conflict. And Jewish worship at one point, I think it's under the Ptolemaic Empire, Antiochus Epiphanes the Fourth, would outlaw Jewish worship. And in defiance of this, some guys who were not descended from the Levites, by the way, the Maccabees, Judas Maccabeus, whose nickname was the Hammer, would rise up, carry out worship, and kill the guard who was trying to stop them. And then it would just give rise to the Hasmonean dynasty. They would carry out worship in defiance of the government that was trying to preside over them. And then within the Jewish people, in their own little jurisdiction that they were given, where they could carry out worship sort of freely, a dispute would rise, like, hang on a second, they're not Levites. And so these feuding sides, this schism from within, would give rise to the offices of Sadducee and Pharisee in the New Testament, ostensibly to kind of quell the dispute and usher in peace. Herod, actually possibly an Edomite, would be placed in charge of them, and he's sort of serving there as a garrison to kind of mitigate the feud and bring about a season of peace. But that sets the context and the culture for the Gospels, when this guy, this warrior king from Greece, would rule a vast realm. This guy, tutored by the greatest minds of the world, right? Aristotle and Socrates. He would proliferate Hellenistic thought throughout his empire, and this would set the tone for the Gospel of John, the very first study that JCM ever published, and that's available to you. That was the very first sermon that I preached at the Redemption Church. So all this prophetic work in Daniel is going well beyond even the context of Esther, All right. I believe that this fourth king who's far richer than the others, I think that's Xerxes. I think that's Ahasuerus. And that's where Esther is. But then look at this. It goes all the way past the dissolution of Alexander the Great's empire to his generals, and then the feuds among their other nations thereafter. And this would all set the tone for the birth of Jesus over the course of the next 300 years. God was just in control. He already knew who would come next. He already knew about Alexander the Great. He already knew about Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle. He already knew about Herod. He already knew about Pilate. He already knew. He already knew. He already knows. He knows today. He knows exactly the cultural climate here in the Seattle area. He knows the pressure on Christians to abdicate certain biblical principles so as to make Christianity more palatable. He knows how they'll sometimes succumb to those. He knows about the infighting among Christians. He knows about your secret struggles with sin. He knows about your doubts. He knows about all of this. He knows how the story ends. He is absolutely sovereign. He was sovereign over Persia from long before Esther was born, long after Esther died. He brought about his will among previous kings of Persia, and he did it after Esther's time. He's able. He is sovereign today too.